All right, back for another episode of the Zero Powerlifting Podcast, proudly sponsored by Establishment Coffee Co. Head to establishmentcoffee.com.au, use the code 025 for 25% off and free shipping. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all. We are returning with episode 1 of 2022, and today I'm going to talk about specificity. That word. We're going to talk about specificity as it relates to what we do in strength training and especially powerlifting. And I wanted to talk about this subject because I feel like people use the term specificity a lot of the times as a bit of a unnecessary justification for things that may not have as much true specificity as what people think. And so the easiest way to break down specificity is to look at what we're trying to achieve at any given point in time. And this is separate to what people generally think of when they think of the term. They think of specific to the sport, and they think of specific to the sporting outcome. So if we're talking about powerlifting, specific to the sporting outcome means 1 rep with maximal weight of squat, bench, deadlift. And so think of where you might use specificity to justify something. For example, it's really common practice to think that you need to pause every single rep of bench press in training because that's what you do in competition. To think that you should bench after your squat on any particular day because that's what you do in competition. And what that neglects to recognize is what the chosen task is, or what the desired outcome of the task is at that point in time. It's really good to think bigger picture. It's really good to think, where am I going with this? But if you skip steps along that journey, ultimately you end up selling yourself short. So when we think of specificity as it relates to strength training, as it relates to powerlifting, we have to think of it encompassing 2 things that make up the task that we are trying to achieve. Those 2 things are going to be the skill and the strength. When we're looking at specificity in terms of what we're trying to achieve at any given point in time in a program, we have to ask ourselves the question, are we being I hate this word so much. Are we being specific to the task at hand? And so, like, think of, if we're trying to combine these 2 things, the skill and the strength, we're going to work on those 2 skills together at some point, but we're probably also going to work on those 2 skills separately. For example, think if you are tasked to squat 100 kilos for 1 rep. You need to have the skill. That is, you need to be able to perform the squat. And you need to have the strength. You need to be able to be strong enough to perform the squat with 100 kilos on your back. If you have the strength but you don't have the skill, you can't do the task. If you have the skill and you don't have the strength, you can't do the task. And so we're trying to develop these 2 things together and then put them together for the outcome at the end. The good thing about most conventional programming is that this happens pretty organically as you go through a block style progression that is relatively linear. That is, you start with high reps, then as you go through the program, you go with lower reps and more weight. And as you do that, the skill that you've developed in the lower reps starts to meet the strength that you're outputting when you get to the skill that you've developed in the higher reps starts to meet the strength that you're trying to output in the lower reps, and you put the 2 together at the end. And so we need to get away from this idea that what we do in training needs to be specific to the sport at the end of the day all the time. Again, we're keeping that vision in our head, but we're focusing on what we're doing at any given moment. So for example, let's say you're in a conditioning phase. We need to be specific to the task of conditioning. And so if we're being specific to the task of conditioning, we can then help determine what a program or what the goal of the program is going to look like. So if I'm trying to get CJ really conditioned for the purpose of work capacity for the next phase, which might be development or hypertrophy, whatever you want to call it, then I need to make sure the muscles that he's going to be using in the movements that we're going to be using, which are going to be more specific in the next phase, are conditioned to the task. That is, if we're going to be doing high volume squats in the next phase, it doesn't make sense for me to make him do a whole bunch of rope throws and sprints and walks around the block to develop his fitness. No, it makes sense for me to get his legs conditioned. I can do that with the movement, or for the sake of variation, I can do that with another movement that still ticks the task of getting those muscle conditioned for the next phase. Rather than thinking, okay, what do we do in powerlifting? We do a low bar back squat. I'm going to get CJ conditioned by making him do 5 sets of 20 low bar back squats. I can change it up a little bit, still achieve the task, and use that skill or that quality that I've developed in the next phase. And as the phases progress towards the end goal, then we can really start to put everything together to be truly specific to the sport. Because you're not specific to the sport until you are lifting really heavy for minimal reps. Doing a heavy set of 5 is not the same as doing a heavy single. They're two completely different things. And so the idea of specificity, if we're talking about the sport of powerlifting, is really one rep max, as heavy as possible. That is the skill that we're trying to develop. That is the strength that we're trying to output. That is true specificity. So again, let's come back to this example of pausing every rep of bench press. In a development block, in a hypertrophy block, if we're going to push the most strength, push the most muscle retention or stress or chase hypertrophy, we want to be doing more sets for more reps. That is the goal of that particular phase because it's going to complement the strength phases to come. If we pause every single rep, essentially we're going to limit our ability to do more sets and more reps of more weight. So why would we do that? It's easy to say, okay, well, it's specific to the sport, but in the sport you only do one rep. So then wouldn't it make sense if we're going to be specific, playing that card, to only pause one rep of all the volume? If you're doing 60 reps in a session, why not just pause one of those reps? Because then that's specific to the task, which is one rep. You know what I mean? So if we're thinking about specificity in that sense, we need to take, again, keep that end goal in the broader view, but our lens should be focused on what our immediate task is. What qualities are we trying to develop in this phase of training? How are those qualities going to complement the next phase of training? How can I take the qualities that I've developed in the previous block of training and use them in this current block of training? If we can look at specificity to task at any point in time and have those tasks set up so they complement each other towards the end goal of true specificity in the sport, we're going to have a far, far, far better outcome. If all we think about is one rep max squat, bench, deadlift all the time in our training, we're probably going to lose sight of the qualities, the things that we need to develop to make sure next time we do go for a one rep max, it's better than last time. Different view of specificity as a whole. Really hope that helped. First podcast back, I can't speak and I don't know why, but hopefully that got the point across. I will see you next time.